I'll kind of wait till folks settle in a bit. I'd like to welcome everybody to the 8th day of the session, Thursday, January 19th, 2023. You know, and when we greet each other today, maybe ask each other just one thing about their family, and just so we can try to learn a little bit more about each other. I think that's a good idea. I'd like to welcome Reverend Rick Veit of St. Mark's Episcopal Church for our prayer of the day. And I'd also like to welcome Reverend Veit's daughter, Lucy. So if we could give a big hand to those two folks today. Thank you, and thank you, Reverend Veit, for joining us today. So if we'd all rise for the prayer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The schools are on
I forgot again.
delays.
I forgot my roll call twice. I've done that this week.
Okay.
Roll call.
Good morning. This is convening roll call for the 8th day, January 19th, 2023. Alamand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Clouston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom excused. Nicholas? Nemec? Northrop? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stiff? Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Swanser Dan? Swanser Dave? Speaker Summers? 51 aye, 11 excused.
All right, now let's try the prayer over again. Please rise and join Reverend Veit.
Thank you. It's been an honor to serve with you this week. I offer you a collect for sound government. O Lord our God, bless the leaders of this state, especially our representatives and those involved with the legislation. Give them courage, wisdom, and foresight. Help them to rely on your strength and to accept their responsibilities to their fellow citizens, that they may make wise decisions for the well-being of our society, for the honor and glory of your name. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The House will please come to order. You know, in the past, a lot of people have thought that, what we do here when we shake each other's hands is a waste of, precious moments, but I think just the opposite. Because I think the only way we get to know and understand each other is if we shake each other's hand and have kind words in the morning. I think it's frankly, a wonderful thing. Representative O'Hearn, do you have a privilege?
Mr. Speaker, privilege of the floor.
Please.
There's a lot of great people up there in the audience today, up in all three balconies, but there's a real special one down here on the floor. Ken Pendergraft has a birthday today. So happy birthday, Ken.
Happy birthday, dear. Happy birthday to you. Well, that's nice. That's nice. What's that? Oh, we need to finish roll call. So we had a committee out or two, so please.
Bear,
Excused.
Byron. Harshman,
Excused.
Locke. Bear. Northrup. Oakley. Penn. Storer. Strzok. Zwanzer Dan. 60 present, 2 excused.
All right, thank you. You got to keep me lined out, Chief. With that, Journal Committee report and Majority Whip, would you come up here for a second? Majority Whip, would you come up here for a second? Journal Committee report.
Your Journal Committee reports that the Journal of January 18th, 2023 has been read and recommends that it be approved. Representatives Ward and Chestick.
We have no doctor of the day today. Messages from the Senate.
Message 139. Mr. Speaker, the Senate adopted the Committee of the Whole report failing the bill listed below by the vote indicated. Senate File 103, Sales Tax Exemption, State Legislators. Ayes 7, Noes 23, excused 1. Sincerely, Ellen Thompson, Senate Chief Clerk.
As soon as I find my list of my script. All right, we're at that order of business of introduction, reading, and reference of bills. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 157.
House Bill 157, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd.
First reading of the bill.
County Board Dissolution Requirements.
House Bill 157 is referred to Committee Number 1 Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 172.
House Bill 172, sponsored by Representative Eklund.
First reading of the bill.
Evidence Preservation.
House Bill 172 is referred to Committee Number 1 Judiciary. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 181.
House Bill 181, sponsored by Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
Online Sports Wagering Amendments.
House Bill 181 is referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 182.
House Bill 182, sponsored by Appropriations.
First reading of the bill.
Skill-Based Amusement Games Amendments.
House Bill 182 is referred to Committee Number 2 Appropriations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 169.
House Bill 169, sponsored by Representative Harshman.
First reading of the bill.
K-12 post-secondary education options.
House Bill 169 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 174.
House Bill 174, sponsored by Representative Andrew.
First reading of the bill.
Homestead exemption amendments.
House Bill 174 is referred to Committee Number 3, Revenue. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 167.
House Bill 167, sponsored by Representative Henderson.
First reading of the bill.
Wyoming Teachers Shortage Loan Repayment Program.
House Bill 167 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 176.
House Bill 176, sponsored by Representative Harshman.
First reading of the bill.
K-12 Education Standards and Assessments.
House Bill 176 is referred to Committee Number 4, Education. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 166.
House Bill 166, sponsored by Representative Winter.
First reading of the bill.
Lodging sales tax exemption.
House Bill 166 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 175.
House Bill 175, sponsored by Representative Strzok.
First reading of the bill.
Excused absence, state fair events.
House Bill 175 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 180.
House Bill 180, sponsored by Representative Davis.
First reading of the bill.
Brucellosis testing, notification requirements.
House Bill 180 is referred to Committee Number 5, Agriculture. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 170.
House Bill 170, sponsored by Representative Harshman.
First reading of the bill.
Public funds, reserves, and spending policy.
House Bill 170 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 171.
House Bill 171, sponsored by Representative Byron.
First reading of the bill.
Notice of state land leases and local opportunities.
House Bill 171 is referred to Committee Number 6, Travel. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 164.
House Bill 164, sponsored by Representative Zwanitzer Dave.
First reading of the bill.
Legal notice, publication on websites.
House Bill 164 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 173.
House Bill 173, sponsored by Representative Provenza.
First reading of the bill.
Records available to post.
House Bill 173 is referred to Committee Number 7, Corporations. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 158.
House Bill 158, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd.
First reading of the bill.
Bid rejection or denial for public works contracting.
House Bill 158 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 160.
House Bill 160, sponsored by Representative Pendergraft.
First reading of the bill.
Driver's license veterans designation, replacing DD Form 214.
House Bill 160 is referred to Committee Number 8, Transportation. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 159.
House Bill 159, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd.
First reading of the bill.
Department of Fire Protection and Electrical Safety fees.
House Bill 159 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 161.
House Bill 161, sponsored by Representative Jennings.
First reading of the bill.
Loan disclosures for guarantors and cosigners.
House Bill 161 is referred to Committee Number 9, Minerals. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 133.
House Bill 133, sponsored by Representative Zwanitzer Dan.
First reading of the bill.
Electrical installation by licensed electricians.
House Bill 133 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 165.
House Bill 165, sponsored by Representative O'Hearn.
First reading of the bill.
Living organ donor protection.
House Bill Number 165 is referred to Committee Number 10, Labor. Reports from the standing committees.
House Bill 2, sponsored by Representative Heiner, Town Officers Salary Waiver, an act relating to cities and towns. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 2, Town Officers Salary Waiver, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zwanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 119, sponsored by Tribal. State Indian Child Welfare Act Task Force, an act relating to children, creating an Indian Child Welfare Act. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 10, Labor, Health, and Social Services, to whom is referred House Bill 19, State Indian Child Welfare Act Task Force, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Chadwick, Clauston, O'Hearn, Penn, Trujillo, Ward, Yin, Zwanitzer. Noes. Representatives Hornock. Representative Zwanitzer, Chairman. House Bill 34, sponsored by Education. School Finance, Mental Health Services, an act relating to school finance. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 4, Education, to whom is referred House Bill 34, School Finance, Mental Health Services, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Allred, Berger, Brown, Houston, Lawley, Northrup, Obermueller, Provenza. Noes. Representative Andrew. Representative Northrup, Chairman. House Bill 43, sponsored by Transportation. Winter road closures, an act relating to highways. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 9, Minerals, Business, and Economic Development, to whom is referred House Bill 43, Winter road closures, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Burkhart, Conrad, Heiner, Knapp, Larson, Lawley. Noes. Representatives Banks, Tarver, Western. Representative Burkhart, Chairman. House Bill 51, sponsored by Management Council. Legislator Constituent Service Allowance, an act relating to the legislature. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 51, Legislator Constituent Service Allowance. Respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zwanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 81, sponsored by Representative Larson Lloyd. Hospital Supplemental Payments, Statutory Fix, an act relating to medical assistance and services. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom was referred House Bill 81, Hospital Supplemental Payments, Statutory Fix, respectfully report same back to the House with a recommendation that it do pass. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zwanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. House Bill 93, sponsored by Water, the Omnibus Water Bill Construction, an act relating to water development projects. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 93, Omnibus Water Bill Construction, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass with the following amendments. Ayes. Representatives Henderson, Larson, Nicholas, Sherwood, Stith, Walters, Zwanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman.
Mr. Majority Floor Leader, did you have a privilege you wanted to?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For those of you that are going off of the yellow sheets on the general file, I would encourage you to go to the website and look at the updated version that was gotten in later last night. I will read these titles off to you, bill numbers in the order that they are currently sitting on general file with the idea that they can be moved. First one was going to be House Bill 65, House Bill 67, House Bill 96, House Bill 94, House Bill 15, House Bill 86, House Bill 10, 24, and 4, 36, and 52. That's what's actually on the general file right now. That is the current order, and that can be amended. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. We are at that order of business of bills on second reading. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 7.
House Bill 7, sponsored by Representatives Awanitzer Dan, underage marriage amendments, an act relating to domestic relations.
House Bill 7, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 11.
House Bill 11, sponsored by Judiciary, State Park Rangers Retirement, an act relating to retirement.
House Bill 11, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. House Bill 14 is the next bill for our consideration.
House Bill 14, sponsored by Judiciary, Civil Case Filing Fees Amendments, an act relating to the courts.
House Bill 14, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 26.
House Bill 26, sponsored by School Facilities Appropriations, an act relating to appropriations for K-12 school facilities.
House Bill 26, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 33.
House Bill 33, sponsored by Education, School Finance, Career Technical Education Grants, an act relating to school finance.
House Bill 33, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 41.
House Bill 41, sponsored by Transportation, Lightweight Trailers, Permanent Registration, an act relating to motor vehicles.
House Bill 41, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 44.
House Bill 44, sponsored by Transportation, Road and Bridge Construction, Alternative Contracting, an act relating to highways.
House Bill 44, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 45.
House Bill 45, sponsored by Transportation, Peace Officers Retirement and Rehiring, an act relating to the administration of government.
House Bill 45, having been read two separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read?
Mr. Speaker, I believe there's an amendment to House Bill 45.
Okay, we didn't have it here.
Mr. Speaker, I do believe it is posted on the website.
All right, we'll stop for a second. We'll get our amendment lined out. We have amendments. Speaker Pro Tem Stiff.
Mr. Speaker, members, I move the adoption of second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 45 and ask for your favorable consideration. This is a continuation of our discussion from yesterday. This would provide that if you are, for example, a highway patrol trooper and you have 20 years in and you retire and begin receiving your retirement benefits, then if you rejoin 31 days later, that your retirement benefits would be suspended during the period of your active reemployment. And so the idea here is to make sure that our employees remain active contributors to their retirement, and so that we don't have employees tempted to game the system. So I stand for questions.
Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on and against this amendment for a couple of reasons. I appreciate the idea behind it. I don't necessarily agree with it at all, but I do appreciate what the good bringer of this amendment is trying to do. A couple of things to keep in mind here, ladies and gentlemen, is it was said yesterday, and I think it was probably one of the best notifications on how this would be, is if we have a peace officer that decides to retire and they decide to go work at the home improvement location that has a big blue roof, just because they chose to go back to work in a different line of work doesn't mean that we would stop their ability to draw their retirement. They're now choosing to come back and rework in the area that maybe they tested the retirement waters and they decided this just wasn't for them and they wanted to come back. Another thing to keep in mind here is we did hear during testimony, and I think this is something that we should probably research before, especially before adopting this amendment, is what this does to the IRS tax code and the potential implications that would have impact to these particular individuals. So one of the things that we did hear from the retirement agency that handles all the state of Wyoming's retirements is when something like this occurs, if there's an employee that retires and then comes back, there's a very set finite amount of processes that have to occur in order for them to stay in legal bounds with the IRS tax code, and ensuring that when they're drawing a retirement, that if that is stopped and then redone, that there's certain portions, especially on a public pension portion, a 401A, for example, which is what a majority of this would be, that there would be potential implications that if we stop their retirement and then can ask them to continue retiring, it's a retirement rehirement, and underneath the IRS tax code, there actually is implications for that. And so I think that before we adopt this amendment, if you want to make the policy choice that if somebody comes back to work, they should be a member of the contributing parties here, that's fine, but we need to make sure that we're not going to inadvertently pass this amendment and then inadvertently cause these peace officers, the troopers, to be in trouble with the federal government and their tax code. So on and against this, I don't see any reason why we would prohibit them from earning their money. If they put 20 years in, they've earned the right to draw that retirement. If they're coming back to serve the state, good for them. In my opinion, I think this is a bad amendment and disincentivizes what we're actually trying to do. Thank you.
Representative Stivar for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and against this amendment, it's just like somebody that retires from the United States military after their 20 years. They go to work for the railroad or anywhere else. They still get to keep their retirement. They've done their 20 years, they retired, so on and against.
Representative Henderson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I speak on and against this. I'd like to gently push back. As policymakers, we want to think about where we are right now in our law enforcement area, particularly the highway patrol, right? It's seriously undermanned. And think about what they've done in their career, please, over the years, what they have served, and they have earned that retirement. And then from an economic standpoint, I'd suggest thinking about the benefits that these retirement dollars bring to our communities in Wyoming. Just as an example, during the last pandemic, we had $800 million going out in retirement to retirees, as I said previously, but very, very, very much a benefit to the communities, those retired checks, 80% of that right back into our communities. The final thing I would say is you're sending a message, I believe, with the policy, or we are, you collective, that we are sending a message to the folks who are working for us now on how we treat our retirees. And I think we have a good start here on a way to mitigate that serious impact of shortages of positions. And frankly, I've talked to several people who are trying to hire law enforcement folks around the state, and they're saying they're not getting applications. So why would we do something, although inadvertently, perhaps, that might counter that effort? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative O'Hearn for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the previous representative mentioned, the troopers and the maintainers of our highways came to us. There's a big shortage in the state. Vote no against this amendment. Thank you.
Representative Heiner for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I tried to give both sides of the story for the members of this body to be able to weigh and choose which side they want to debate on or which side they want to vote on. I want you to consider the merits of this amendment from both perspectives. most annuities or retirement systems are backloaded, meaning that the longer you work, the more money you make in retirement. Could it be that our troopers are retiring after 20 years and finding out that they cannot survive on that annuity, and thus they are looking for another job and going to the home improvement place? They find out that, yeah, they got a job and it's making, $15, $18 an hour, but still, they're not living the life of luxury they were hoping for in retirement. But as a trooper, they were in a career that hopefully they were able to advance in, that they loved. For that reason, they joined it when they were young or when they first started, and they have a skill set. So let's weigh the merits of this, that what this amendment does is it allows them to stay in that career that they originally chose and accrue additional benefits for a longer career, and maybe have a better retirement at the end of a longer career in state service, such that they don't have to go to the home improvement place to work after they retire. So let's consider both sides of that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Anybody for their second time before the bringer? Representative O'Hearn for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the bill is written, when they retire after 20 years of service, and they cannot start receiving money until they're 50 years of age, their retirement benefit stops. So if you retire at 20 years and your retirement benefit is, as the previous speaker said, $3,000, you're out of work for a month or two, and you say, you know what, I can't live on this, and I don't like working under the blue roof. I'll take my skill set back to my job, but that locks them in. Their retirement is always going to be $3,000. If they stay past the 20 years, their retirement benefits keeps adding up. So I don't think a lot of them are going to jump out at the 20 years and say, I'm done. Everybody has seen on their Social Security check or their Social Security that if you work to 62, it's this much. If you work to 67 in 10 months, in my case, it's this much. If I work till I'm 72, it's this much. So a lot of older people and able-bodied people are working longer to make sure their benefit is higher. So if they retire at 20, they're locking in their retirement. But I'm sure there's some of them that are going to work till they're 55, 60 to keep building that benefit because they're in the right job. And the troopers and the maintainers of our roads need them. Please vote no.
Anyone else for their second time before the bringer? Speaker Pro Tem Stith.
Mr. Speaker, members, retirement plan and retirement benefits should be for people who are retired. Okay? This amendment accomplishes that. Please vote aye. Thank you.
We'll now vote on second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 45. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All those opposed? No. Second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 45 has failed. House Bill 45, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. The next bill for our consideration is House Bill 73. It has amendments.
House Bill 73, sponsored by Representative Stivar. Annexation, vote requirement, an act relating to cities and towns.
Representative Harrelson, I believe we're ready to go with you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At this time, I move second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 73 and ask for your favorable consideration. So this amendment is simply addressing the 2/3 simple majority concept. I understand the concept of 2/3, but I also know that this could effectively grind to a halt any annexations in any communities going forward. And I believe that having a simple majority is still allowing, it's 51%, so at that point, you're still allowing a majority to voice. This is still shifting it to a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. And it also talks about in here the parcel concept instead of the majority concept. And so I believe that this is going to make this bill more accessible for our municipalities as we move forward. And I believe it still gets its point across, making it where the conversation has to happen before it moves forward. But at the same time, this keeps us out of that 2/3 realm for the de-annexation or annexation. So, and with that, I stand for questions.
Representative Singh for your first time. No, you're not at the mic. All right. Chairman Olson for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On and for the amendment. This is the amendment that the Corporations Committee wrestled with in hearing testimony. I think there is no doubt that we heard significant testimony from citizens, particularly in the county that we are in right now, that there are problems with the procedure. The primary problem was just simply receiving notice. The bill, as amended under the standing committee amendment that you adopted, fixed that problem because it required a notice to not just be sent within the parcels that are being touched, but within 550 feet of any parcels that are being touched. So that was the primary concern that we heard from our citizens. And the second concern that I believe that we heard from our citizens was simply that they wanted to have a voice in the process. So this bill is not intended to prohibit annexations, but if you keep the 2/3 threshold, at least is my opinion that you would be prohibiting, you would never have any annexations. To get to 2/3 would be virtually impossible. If you look at, I think you just got to look at voter apathy in elections to give you a really clear sign that if you can barely get less than 40% of people to show up in an election and cast a vote for their representatives that serve in their government, how are you ever going to get 2/3 to show up, then alone to actually vote in favor of annexation? So this is a good amendment in that it strikes that balance where we still have to have input from the people who are affected by it, but not at such a high bar that we are actually prohibiting growth and services, particularly that might need to be provided, trash, sewer, water, et cetera, to those citizens, which is probably the main reason why they're being annexed, is service-based. So on and for the amendment.
Representative Wiley for your first time.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I'm on and for this amendment. I think it's going to help folks in our communities, and it's going to let them have a voice, and this is just a good amendment to the bill. Thank you.
Anybody else for their first time? Representative Stivar for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe this is a friendly amendment, so please vote aye.
All right, anybody for their second? Representative O'Hearn for your first time.
First for a second, Mr. Speaker.
Anybody else for their first time? Anybody for their second time before the bringer? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe we've probably heard it explained well, and with that, I call for the question.
All those in favor of second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 73 signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion passes. Second reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 73 is passed. Okay, we have one more amendment, and I believe Representative Singh, this is yours.
Thank you, Mr.
Representative Singh.
Speaker. At this time, I move second reading amendment 2 to House Bill 73. And at this time, I will explain the amendment. On page 2, line 15 of House Reading 1, Amendment 1, we would be in the House Standing Committee amendment to this line before to any persons, insert by first-class mail. Second would be on page 2, line 18. After annexation, insert unless approval is not required under paragraph VII of this subsection. Third would be on page 3, line 1. After VII, insert except as otherwise provided in this paragraph. Then page 3, lines 1 and 6, delete entirely and insert subsection, period. Failure to respond to this notice under paragraph VI of this subsection shall be considered an approval of the proposed annexation. This paragraph shall not apply if the area sought to be annexed is entirely within the corporate limits of the annexing city or town. And so the reasons why I bring these amendments are to, firstly, create more convenience for our constituents when they're put in the situation, so that way they don't need to wrestle with the burden of getting certified mail, and to put the burden of responsibility to respond to this proposal on the property owner themselves. That way, the city can't be held liable in that regard. So I ask for your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Representative Zwanitz or Dave for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the fine bringer of the amendment, I have just a couple of questions. I'm curious why we're doing first-class mail instead of certified mail. And secondly, once we've mailed that and they have not responded, should there not be a time limit? So 30 days, 60 days, 90 days before we make the assumption that that is an approval, the fact that they did not respond.
Sure.
Representative Larson for your first time.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the amendment to tag on to what the previous speaker said. So we find a lot of times the first-class mail just doesn't get there, and so we're wondering why that was deleted. And then there's no provision in here for electronic correspondence with a response, which seems to work reasonably well, and we see our statutes being upgraded accordingly. So just wondering why, if that was considered.
Representative Stivar for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll answer the question on the first-class mail. This is the area where the citizens are just being notified that there is an annexation going on, but they're not part of the annexation. That's that 200 or 550 feet from where the annexation's happening. They don't get a vote. So that's why it's first-class mail. Follow up on good chairman or good representative from Land of the Tigers up there. It still falls within that 20 days. Once the registered mail goes out and they sign for it, they've got the 20 days to respond back. If they don't respond back, it's an aye vote. That puts it back on the landowners to be more active. Same way in Masons. Masons, if we're in a committee meeting, somebody just does not want to vote, Mason says it's an automatic aye.
Representative Craigo for your first time, and Speaker Pro Tem Stith, could you come take the chair here in a minute? I have
Thank you,
Representative Craigo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm just a little bit confused, and maybe the bringers of the amendment can help me out on this, because I think we're creating language that contradicts itself within the bill draft. On page 2, we say you have to, if you believe that the annexation is proper, you have to respond in writing. But then in the amendment on page 3, we're saying if you don't respond, it's assumed you agree to the annexation. And so that just feels like we're contradicting ourselves. And I appreciate the idea, because I actually am in that camp that if you don't respond, you've given up that right. So I'm just wondering if we need to move forward with a different amendment on a different day to try to fix that, because I don't think this amendment gets to where we're trying to go.
Representative O'Hearn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm on and for the amendment, but I want to clear some stuff up, and that's why I got up a minute ago. I work for a city in the center part of the state. We don't go out kicking doors in trying to annex in neighborhoods. We have to have an improvement service district, an ISD set up to make sure that it's capable of coming into the city with proper water, proper sewage, proper lighting, streets, so the fire department can go down every street and turn around. Most annexations, every annexation since I've been with the city for 12 years, the people on the outside have come to me requesting, can we annex? And we say, you have to set up an ISD, an Improvement Service District. And it's based on the population, or I mean the parcel size, because if one landowner owns 500 acres and the six adjoining landowners want roads to their property, the one that owns the most is going to have to pay the lion's share of it. So that's why it's by parcel also, majority, but by parcel size. So I just wanted to clear some stuff up. On and for the amendment, still against the bill.
Representative Hornock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First for second.
Anyone else for their first time? Anyone for their second time? Hearing none. Representative Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I bring this for the convenience of my constituents who would potentially have to deal with this problem. The hassle of going through certified mail is time consuming and it does cost money. And this would make it easier for my constituents to respond to the city. But I do believe that the city should have some degree of safety when it comes to the burden of response. So if folks are unable to respond within the allocated time, then that they should be allowed to be annexed. Thank you.
Representative Stivar, as a sponsor of the bill, you bring us home.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With the good country lawyer over here, there will be another amendment coming on third reading if this makes it. On page 2, where it says they have to respond in writing, it was an oversight when we discussed the new amendment to take that portion out. So I'm just answering your question. Please vote aye.
All right. All those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 73, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed? No. The noes have it. Division having been called, all those in favor of second reading amendment number 2 to House Bill 73, please stand. All right. Those opposed, please stand. All right, by a vote of 32 to 26, House second reading amendment to House Bill, second reading amendment, the second amendment to House, on the second reading to House Bill 73 has passed. House Bill 73, having been read 2 separate times, the question is, shall the bill be read a third time? Hearing no objection, it is so ordered. We are at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the consent list consisting of the following House bills on third reading: House Bill number 12, House Bill 18, House Bill 31, House Bill 47, House Bill 62, and House Bill 69.
Speaker,
Okay.
Chairman,
It's come to my attention that House Bill 47 has an amendment and needs to be removed from the consent list.
yes.
So House Bill 47 is removed from the consent list. Are there any others have an amendment? Okay. Would anyone like any of the other bills removed from the consent list? Representative Ottman, 62, is removed from the consent list. Will the reading clerk read the bills on the consent list?
House Bill 12, sponsored by Judiciary. Presumptive child support amounts, updated tables, an act relating to child support. House Bill 18, sponsored by Tribal. Missing Persons Alert Systems, an act relating to Missing Persons Alert System being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 31, sponsored by Education. BOCES as local education agencies, an act relating to education being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 62, sponsored by Minerals. Open Banking, an act relating to banking being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming. House Bill 69, sponsored by Representative Larson. Coal-fired facilities closures, litigation funding amendments, an act relating to the administration of government being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
So with the exception of House Bill 62, that was the reading of the consent list. Having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall these bills pass the House? The clerk will call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Warnock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom excused. Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermueller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith?
Aye.
Storr? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Swanser Dan? Swanser Dave? Speaker Summers?
Excused.
As for House Bill 12, are there any changes? Warnock? Aye to no. We're standing. Singh? Aye to no. Smith? Aye to no. Haroldson? Aye to no. Ward? Aye to no. Slagle? Aye to no. Can you sit down after I call your name? Thanks. Andrew? Aye to no. Penn? Aye to no. Stivar? Aye to no. Davis? Aye to no. Ottman? Aye to no. Bear? Aye to no. Strock? Aye to no. Winter? Aye to no. Knapp? Aye to no. Heiner? Aye to no. Jennings? Aye to no. Allemand? Aye to no. Northrup? Aye to no. Locke? Aye to no. Henderson? Aye to no. Brown? Aye to no. Trujillo? Aye to no. Nyman? Aye to no. Olson? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. On House Bill 12, 35 aye, 25 no, 2 excused. As for House Bill 18, are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 60 aye, 2 excused. As for House Bill 31, are there any changes? Penn, aye to no. Smith, aye to no. Slagle, aye to no. Stivar, aye to no. Bear, aye to no. Ward, aye to no. Winter, aye to no. Haroldson, aye to no. Jennings, aye to no. Heiner, aye to no. Allemand, aye to no. Pendergraft, aye to no. Locke, aye to no. Further changes? Ottman, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 46 aye, 14 no, 2 excused. As for House Bill 69, are there any changes? Provenza? Aye to no. Chadwick? Aye to no. Oh, Chestick, I'm sorry. Further changes? Sherwood, aye to no. Storer, aye to no. Yin, aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 55 aye, 5 no, 2 excused.
Having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bills 12, 18, 31, and 69 have passed the House. We are at that order of business of bills on third reading and final passage. The first bill for our consideration is House Bill 3. House Bill 3 has
House Bill 3, sponsored by corporations, State Assessment of Independent Power Producers, an act relating to ad valorem taxation being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have an amendment.
At this
Good
time, Mr.
Representative.
Speaker, I will,
Representative Davis.
Pardon?
Representative Davis, you may proceed.
at this time, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chairman, I would like to hold the amendment.
Withdraw.
Withdrawal.
Hearing no objection, it is so done. House Bill 3, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Allemande. Allemande. I'm sorry.
We're voting on 3.
Allred. Andrew. Angelos. Banks. Bear. Berger. Brown. Burkhart. Byron. Chadwick. Chestick. Clausen. Conrad. Crago. Davis. Eklund. Haroldson. Harshman. Heiner. Henderson. Hornock. Jennings. Knapp. Larson Lloyd. Larson JT. Lawley. Locke. Nyman. Newsom excused. Nicholas. Nemec. Northrup. Oakley. Obermueller. O'Hearn. Olson. Ottman. Pendergraft. Penn. Provenza. Rodriguez Williams. Sherwood. Singh. Slagle. Smith. Stith.
No.
Storer. Strzok. Stivar. Tarver. Trujillo. Walters. Ward. Washut. Western. Winter. Wiley. Yin. Zwanzer Dan. Zwanzer Dave. Speaker Summers.
Excused.
Are there any changes? Are there any changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 53 aye, 7 no, 2 excused.
House Bill 3, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 3 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration on third reading is House Bill 47. There is an amendment.
House Bill 47, sponsored by corporations, Election Equipment, Federal Certification, an act relating to elections being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have an amendment. Representative Zwanitzer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I'd move third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 47, ask for its favorable introduction. Members, there actually are a lot of people who watch the legislature in Wyoming and look at our bills. And so yesterday, one of those national good government election integrity organizations, sent out some questions regarding these 2 stanzas that I'm attempting to delete in the bottom of page 3 and the top of line 4. And I'll just go ahead and read you the language we're putting in the statute and codifying and it's proof of the vendor's escrow account containing the source code for the electronic voting system and the system components. That is apparently drawing some concern that when we're talking about the source code and putting that into our codified law, that is proprietary information, which likely should not be shared or be discoverable or available. Some of these, I'm not sure how familiar people are with source code, but think of the information and proprietary information on your phones, on your computers for your applications. And so there's some fear that by putting this in statute and having that information be required, that we would have some of those electronic voting systems refuse to offer that to our state because that's proprietary. So again, this is all in rules and regs currently, and so if we do take this out of the statute, it still falls back to rules and regs, which are much easier to remove if there is a concern or an issue. But once you put it in statute, you have to wait for the legislature to come back into session and remove it. So erring on the side of caution and knowing that this bill still is going, hopefully, down the hall, that it could be further delineated and corrected if necessary, I thought it best to go ahead and address the concern at this point and ask that to take this information out at the current time.
Representative Ward, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I stand opposed to that. Source code for election equipment should be very simple, very understandable, and available to anyone who would like to audit it. Thank you.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for the bringer of the amendment. This group that had issue with the particular language in the bill, did they have issue with the rules when they were being used and, were codifying the rules that have been used in the past? Did they have any issue with the rules prior to this?
Anyone else for their first time? Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So I did look up the history. Since it is a committee bill, we have minutes from our Corporations Committee history. This was added sometime as an amendment to the Corporations Committee bill in October. I don't know if that means that it was in rules. I'll probably check right after I sit down, but I'm not sure if this one was actually in our existing rules.
Anyone else for their first time? Anyone for their second time? Representative Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to reiterate what I said the first time. The source code cannot be claimed as proprietary. Otherwise, we don't have confidence in our elections. It needs to be available to people knowledgeable in that field so that it can be audited and verified. No election equipment should be considered proprietary. No code, no source code should be considered proprietary with respect to our elections. Thank you.
Anyone else for their second time? To the sponsor, Representative Zwanitzer or Dan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to answer some of those questions, I do not believe we had heard from this group in the interim or from what I understand when rules and regs were put in place several years ago. So this is the first I'm hearing from them, but it did seem to make a compelling argument when I reviewed their talking points. I don't know how in-depth this source code is, but I do know that there's competition in the marketplace, at least 3 major vendors when it comes to these systems. And so if there is some belief that this source code is proprietary and they don't want it shared, certainly we don't want them hacked. I do think it's best that if there is concern in this area to take it out of statute, because we can't fix it once it's in statute. And I do appreciate that the concern is at least brought now, and there's still some time to, I think, further get into those concerns. I know we shouldn't talk about the other body, but I did think it best to go ahead and send a clean bill over to the Senate without anything that's controversial in this bill.
All those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 47, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The amendment has failed. Division having been called, all those in favor of third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 47, please stand. All those opposed, please stand. With 25 ayes and 31 noes, third reading amendment number 1 to House Bill 47 has failed. House Bill 47, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Okay. Ellement? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom excused. Nicholas? Nemec? Northrop? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith?
Aye.
Storer? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Zwanser Dan? Zwanser Dave? Speaker Summers? Excused.
Excused.
Are there any changes? Nicholas? Disappeared. No to aye. Any changes, further changes? Warnock? Aye to no. Provenza? No to aye. Further changes? Swanitzer Dave? No to aye. Further changes? Closing vote? Vote closed. 33 aye, 27 no, 2 excused.
House Bill 47, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 47 has passed the House. The next bill for our consideration on third reading is House Bill 62.
House Bill 62, sponsored by Minerals, Open Banking, an act relating to banking, being enacted by the legislature of the state of Wyoming.
We have an amendment. Representative Ottman, do you have an amendment to House Bill 62? Representative Ottman? Representative Ottman? Please proceed.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. I move amendment to House Bill 62 to remove the enacting clause, and I'll do that at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Do you have any discussion on the amendment, Representative Ottman?
Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ottman.
Yes. Okay. According to House Bill 62, excuse me, I'm rattled. When we looked at the bill originally, there was a lot of support for it, opening it up for different things. Since then, I have had an overwhelming response from constituents that said that this is not a good idea, that there's consumer protection, things that are going to be put on there that are very invasive. So until that information can be verified, I can't support the bill. Thank you.
Representative Olson, for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. On and against this amendment and for the bill, I know that you've received a lot of emails, so I want to just back us up and talk about what this bill actually does, because based on the comments that I just heard about consumer protection, you want this bill if you want consumer protection. It does the exact opposite of that. So it's a really simple bill. If you look at page 2, there's 3 definitions. And if we walk through these 3 definitions, you're going to see exactly what the bill does. But let me preface that by saying this is permissive. Banks may choose to participate in this. So that's the first step. It would be nice if they were required to, because this is a protection bill, but it's a first step. So the first thing is, what are we talking about? We're talking about on page 2, customer data, It means customers' banking transactions, your constituents' transactions, and other financial data. Your financial data and your constituents' financial data. That's what we're talking about. What does the bill require? Open banking means, here's the definition, that the bank must provide access either directly or indirectly when it is providing to a third party. It must have your express written consent of the customer to provide that data. So that's exactly what this bill does. This bill says you have financial data. Currently, a bank may be able to provide that data to a third party without your consent. This bill says, no, you can't do that. You must have my express written consent to provide my data. Folks, that's it. The bill's just that simple. I can't understand the emails and where they come from. I've read them myself. I think it's a misunderstanding with, honestly, we didn't come up with the terminology open banking. Maybe it should be called closed banking, because what it really is closing in your data and you having control over your data. So on and against this amendment and for the bill.
Representative Western for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in opposition to this amendment, and I support the bill, and I encourage you all to as well. And I'm not going to repeat what the good city lawyer said, but there's been all these blast emails. Unfortunately, most of what is said, pretty much everything that is said in them is misleading or just flat out wrong. For example, if you read the bill, it gives our banking division, which already has oversight over our banks and every aspect of the functions they perform for customers. In Title 13, there's already a lot of consumer protections in place with these banks, the third-party vendors they interact with, what those banks can do with customer data, what they cannot do with customer data. And in testimony, we heard some really good concerns, or rather some really good testimony from our director and some of the things that he would consider should this pass, because the bill explicitly allows for the Division of Banking to promulgate rules governing this. Specific, a couple that I mentioned before, and I will mention again: third-party obligations, record retention obligations, implementation period, coverage of data providers who would be subject to the proposals under consideration, the types of information that would need to be made available, those types of things. So we've already got lots of consumer data protection in place under Title 13. I encourage you to go and look at them. So there's already a lot of protections in place. And again, to reiterate what the good city lawyer said, this is strictly permissive. It is optional. So please vote aye. Thank you.
Representative Majority Floor Leader Nyman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for a little better understanding, I had a conversation this morning with the association that represents bankers. And I was asked him what is the deal with this and why is it necessary? And he said, well, actually, he said the feds just came out with basically rules, even since the committee has met, that takes care of all of this. And so his position to me was, and maybe if somebody has an alternative opinion on that, I would love to hear it. He said this is a piece of unnecessary legislation at this point because the feds are going to preempt us. And he said, so they've already set rules and they've got them out for what's it? Basically for, God, it escapes me. They got them out for everybody to look at and opine on them, and they'll come in. But anyway, his determination was that the feds had recently, just within the last couple of days, come out with rules for this that will take care of this. And so I'm asking whether or not this is even necessary at that point. Thank you.
Representative Allred for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo what was just said. I presented that when the bill was first presented. I have since talked to another banker also about the fraud, and they affirmed that that is possible. So it's a duplication, as I said before, and not necessary. Thank you.
Representative Bear for your first time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really appreciate the bringer of the amendment so that we can have this discussion a little bit further, because I think there's a lot of confusion about this bill. I remember hearing it in committee during the interim, and I could go either way today on it for two reasons. One is when we were drafting the bill and working on it in interim, there was no indication when these federal rules were going to come out. And just so everybody knows, my understanding is the federal rules are out, but there's a 2-year period of comment. And so what this bill would do is give the state a little bit more negotiating power, if you will, during that time of comment. I frankly like the idea that is very clearly in the bill that you have to opt in to have your information available. So that's a real plus for the bill. To the majority floor leader's question, is it really necessary? Other than that negotiating piece, I'm not sure. So you vote your conscience. Thank you.
Anyone else for the first time? Representative Knapp.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Having heard testimony, I would speak in favor of the bill. I think it's good for Wyoming to have rules in place until those federal rules clear. And I had questions of my own. Open banking somewhat exists now with several things. If you ever have a daughter that asks for money quite frequently, you'll understand digital banking. But my concerns were always, do you have the ability to opt in, which is voluntary, as has been mentioned? The security of it, the ability to close access once you do sign an agreement to open with an entity, the limit of information, and whether it's per account or your entire accounts, I think was important too. And they addressed all those through the commission. Thank you.
Anyone else for their first time? Representative Western for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to echo the sentiments from one of the gentlemen from the land of coal, in that the federal rulemaking process takes a long time, and it just started. To kind of give us some context here, I think we need to ask ourselves this. If the feds draft perfect regulation that strikes the perfect balance, sure, it is absolutely possible that this act could be rendered useless or unnecessary. But I think the follow-up question to ask would be, how often does Washington, D.C. draft perfect regulation? We know the answer to that, and it's quite infrequently. I think the man from the northeast part of the state said, is this necessary? I can't look you all in the eye and say, this is absolutely necessary. I'll admit that. But I think we have to, the way we should frame this bill is this, the question we should be asking is, how can this enhance the businesses in our state? About 5 years ago, we passed some legislation regarding new banking entities for digital assets and cryptocurrencies. At the time, we had no idea what the impact would actually be. We had a pretty good idea, and we had a hunch, and we're optimistic, but we couldn't look you in the eye and say, we know this is going to have a big impact in our state. We know this is going to drive jobs in our state. 5 years later, some of those entities have had their banking, have been granted banking charters, and there's about 200 or so jobs in the state based off that same type of argument. So I can't promise you that this is absolutely necessary, that this will yield economic fruits to our state. But given the activity that's going on right now, the interest in this, I think it will. It plants a flag in the ground to some of these companies that engage in these types of things, saying, hey, we are open for business. This types of developers, these APIs, we want you to work here, to live here, to invest in our state. So that's kind of some of the context. So please vote aye.
Representative Olson for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. Yeah, just really quickly, I want to address this federal regulation. You know, the idea that a rule has been proposed is not new. That the fact that we finally got to the stage where there is an open banking rule proposed is new, but the conversation about it has existed throughout the interim, and we have wrestled with that reality. It's the rule making process, as was properly described, can take several years for us to get to the point where we actually have a rule. But just because there is a rule, there's really multiple outcomes with a federal rule. One is it could subsume this state law because it could be expansive enough that it trumps the state law. But it could also be limited in scope, so limited in scope that that portions of the state law or the state law by itself still apply. So just because there's a federal rule doesn't mean that you should abandon this good bill. And then the last thing I want to talk about, you know, the association of banks. You know, banks have in the United States have a hard time getting behind this. So I wouldn't be surprised if they told you that it was unnecessary, because the reason why they have a hard time getting behind it is because not only does this bill provide consumer protection for you and your constituents, it's going to spur competition. If banks that are going to openly engage in open banking, and they're going to have a protocol put in place that's going to get your express written consent for every single piece of information they share, number one, that's going to be expensive to come up with that program. That's why this bill's permissive. We're not making banks do it because it could be very expensive to come up with the protocol. But for the banks that do it, just imagine who's going to want to bank there. I'm going to want to bank there, and I bet your constituents are going to want to do that too when they figure out how much of their information is protected by that protocol. It's going to spur real competition, and it's going to potentially result in new financial institutions rising up because they take this very seriously. So just think about why you might be hearing from the Association of Banking on it. We've worked with them throughout the interim to get this bill to where it's at. We agreed on it being permissive. That was a kumbaya moment. So I do think this bill is necessary. I think we should pass it forward, wait and see what the federal reg does. That's one thing, but move this bill forward for your constituents for the protection of their consumer data. Thank you.
Anybody else for their second time? Representative Ottman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I just want to thank everybody for the discussion, and that's pretty much what we need. When we have a lot of confusion and doubt and fear about what's going on in our personal lives and with our banking, we need to have that discussion. So I thank everybody, and I move to remove the amendment.
The amendment is withdrawn. Thank you.
Thank you.
House Bill 62, having been read 3 separate times, the question is, shall the bill pass? Chief Clerk will call the roll.
Allemand? Allred? Andrew? Angelos? Banks? Bear? Berger? Brown? Burkhart? Byron? Chadwick? Chestick? Klauston? Conrad? Crago? Davis? Eklund? Haroldson? Harshman? Heiner? Henderson? Hornock? Jennings? Knapp? Larson Lloyd? Larson JT? Lawley? Locke? Nyman? Newsom excused. Nicholas? Nemec? Northrup? Oakley? Obermuller? O'Hearn? Olson? Ottman? Pendergraft? Penn? Provenza? Rodriguez Williams? Sherwood? Singh? Slagle? Smith? Stith? Storr? Strock? Stivar? Tarver? Trujillo? Walters? Ward? Washut? Western? Winter? Wiley? Yin? Swanser Dan? Swanser Dave? Speaker Summers? Are there any changes? All read? Aye to no. Further changes? Jennings? Aye to no. Further changes? Ottman? Aye to no. Further changes? Closing vote. Vote closed. 46 aye, 15 no, 1 excused.
House Bill 62, having received the affirmative vote of the majority of the members elected to the House, House Bill 62 has passed the House. Chairman Northrup.
I have 2 re-referrals.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to re-refer House Bill 34 and House Bill 33 to your Committee Appropriations.
Chairman Northrup, could you repeat those numbers, the number there?
House Bill 34 and House Bill 33.
Okay.
Chairman Northrup, would you come to the front?
House Bill 34 is re-referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Mr. Majority Floor Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move the House resolve itself into committee of the whole.
You have heard the motion. All those in favor say aye. Those opposed? Representative Slagle. Got your script right there.
Committee of the whole, please come to order. The only problem is I don't have my list of bills, so. Okay, thank you. Okay, the first bill for our consideration is House Bill 65. The reading clerk will read the bill. House Bill 65, sponsored by Revenue, 988 Suicide Prevention, an act relating to suicide prevention. Mr. Speaker, your committee number 3, Revenue, to whom's referred House Bill 65, 988 Suicide Prevention, respectfully reports same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Byron, Harshman, Northrup, Oakley, Storer, Zwanitzer, Bear, Locke, Strzok. This bill was re-referred to Committee Number 2, Appropriations. Mr. Speaker, your Committee Number 2, Appropriations, to whom is referred House Bill 65, 988, Suicide Prevention, respectfully report same back to the House with the recommendation that it do pass. Ayes, Representatives Henderson, Larson, Sherwood, Stith, Walters. Noes, Representatives Nicholas, Zwanitzer. Representative Nicholas, Chairman. Okay, you have heard the reading of the bill. What is your pleasure? Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I move that when the committee of the whole rises to report, it do so with the recommendation that House Bill 65 do pass. And members, I'm actually, Mr. Chairman, I'm going to explain the bill and it has no amendments. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members, I just sent you an email and it's basically got 4 pages. And I didn't attach them, I just pasted them. So it's probably a pretty heavy email. It might take a minute to get to you, but I won't get to this handout unless you have questions really, but I just want to take you through the bill. Members, the 988 Suicide Prevention Hotline was a bill signed by President Trump in October of 2020, establishing this national system similar to what we know of 911. And Wyoming is actually the last state to implement it. And so whether you agree with the funding of this bill or not, and we'll talk about that, this is the new statute that sets up the program. And the program is up and running now, and it's funded by federal funds, and that's going to come to an end July 1st of 2024. We're funding it right now with ARPA funds. Previously, Suicide Prevention Hotline was a 10-digit number. Out-of-stater would answer the call, and and it wasn't staffed 24/7. So what this has done is move this in-state. This system set up by the federal government, as I said, signed by President Trump, 988, and there's going to be a person in Wyoming to answer your call. I just want to talk about it. I'll walk you through the bill if you have the bill in front of you or if you have it online, and you can see the bottom of page 1. It sets up Wyoming Statute 3525, 501 through 508 is a new statute. And as you flip over to page 2 and 3 of the bill, these are just definitions. I would draw your attention to the top of page 3. And this is a federal definition on page 3, line 1, where it says crisis center. And really, that's the same thing as call center. And I just say in my head, CC, crisis center, is the same as call center. And, but that's that federal language, and it means the exact same thing. Then there's other definitions for a crisis facility. Those are already in statute. We've had those about 20 years. Those are throughout our state. And then more definitions. Mobile crisis teams are permissible in this. It's defined. Mr. Chairman, I'm flipping over to page 4, more definitions. And then to page 5, really sets up in 502 the call center itself. And it has some shall things. If you go down page 5 with me on paragraph B, talks about the agreement, talks about the requirements, talks about the data that is private. And then flipping over to page 6, talks about crisis services that can be deployed. And these are not police and firefighters. These are different in every community. And then paragraph 5 on page 6, meet these requirements that are set forth in this whole national kind of program, but it gives states the ability to use other groups to help them. Veterans is one group that is working in this to help other veterans and so on. And so each community might look a little different, but the bottom of page 6 provide follow-up to every caller, right? So every call is going to get follow-up to make sure. And I think when I first started teaching, I think 37 years ago, boy, you never said the word suicide. You just never said that around young people. We were forbidden to even talk about it for fear you might give somebody an idea. And that's all changed, and I think we all know what we've learned is a lot of it when people are in crisis. It's, somebody putting a hand on their shoulder and being there for them, talking to them. That's how a lot of it's resolved. And so that's the real commitment to this, is that somebody's going to be on the other end of that line from Wyoming. And they're going to know where Casper is, or Midwest Wyoming, or Sundance, or Evanston. It's not going to be somebody from New Jersey or Illinois or California or wherever. Okay, so then, Mr. Chairman, over on page 7, it's more things that it tells the department it shall do. It will provide the oversight, draft rules. Romanet 3 on line 10 about working together with other stakeholders around the state and in our communities. And then Romanet 4, that they have a united front. I mean, 988 is here to stay. Right? It's not going away. And so that's part of it. And then on page 8, the department will provide the data. Then also on page 8, it starts talking about mobile crisis teams. Line 11, page 8, it says may. These are going to look different in every community, right? Some will be volunteers, some will be others, but it gives some direction for that. Flipping over to page 9, talks about payment for services. We're really careful about folks who are struggling. I'll just tell you a story happened. We were in the Jonah building, and Title 25 holds. And a lot of this stress is financial. And there was a kid, he was a former student of mine. He was about 28 years old, had a little business in Casper, had a Title 25 hold. Gets out, he's kind of getting back together, and he gets this bill now for like $30,000. Well, he's not gonna, and then he ended his life. So the former speaker from Campbell County, who moved over to the other end, he was working on the health committee at that time. There was a bill, and we fixed that. And so we don't send these charges to people who are just getting out of this crisis. We'll figure a way to do that. And so this is kind of ensure this is part of the talk in the committee as well. Okay, that's page 9. I think talking about the money on page 10, 11, page 11 on line 12 talks about a 5% of the 5-year average. And so how we're going to fund this. So the committee looked, and this was given to us by Management Council, to find a funding stream for this, because 911, we have a tax on our phone lines to pay for 911. And that's what we first considered, was a tax on our phone lines, and that was not supported. We had a lot of folks show up to not want a tax. The other option is to let it ride in the general fund and compete for funds like everything else. And then the third option, and we've got about $2.5 billion surplus, and this is part of the fights we're going to have, is how we save money. And so we decided to save some of our surplus to provide this service in perpetuity. And and just talking briefly about the dollars, those are on page, I think it's on page 15. And it talks about $40 million in Romanet 1 on line 11, and then $6 million in the reserve account. And why those numbers? The 40 million then will provide about 2 million annually at a 5% spending policy to fund these call centers that are about just under a million, 750, 800,000 a year, and then these mobile response teams and other services that the legislature, appropriations committee sees. And this is not a pot of money that goes to an independent board that the appropriations committee won't see when they draft budgets, and that we won't see as a legislature. So that'll be for us to appropriate. And the $6 million reserve account is similar to what we're trying to do with all of our reserve accounts, is to make sure that it's large enough. 5X is what we call it, 5 times. So we take that 40 million times 3% times 5 years, come with that number, and it can be invested in for a higher rate of return, a total rate of return, instead of staying liquid. And then we'll be able to grow the corpus more. So that's why that number is there. Again, why a trust fund? So there's 9,000 calls last year. Most of these calls go up, frankly, when Wyoming's hurting the worst. You know, when people are losing their jobs and when oil has dropped down to $20 a barrel, and when people are hurting. And that's when people get into this financial stress, the calls are going to go up. So what happened starting in 2016 with our budget, right? I was chairman of appropriations then. And it was the steepest, sharpest decline in our state's history till COVID. And so the last 6 years have been tough. We've been sending our seniors out of state for residential treatment. What we've slashed to providers all across the board. And so we wanted to make sure that this thing will be funded through the inevitable ups and downs, right? I mean, I'm a kid from Midwest Wyoming. I remember the bumper stickers. There were always 2 of them. Pray for me, I drive highway 59. And then, Lord, give me one more boom. I promise not to waste it. And so we've become really good at saving money to provide services for the long term. So with that, and I've got in your handout, the very first page shows you some of the current trust funds we have now that we've established. Some of them are relatively new. And you can see those, everything from support military veterans who come back from combat. That was established, you know, after 9/11, early in the mid-2000s. We recently established an emergency water trust fund. And you can see all those. I'll be happy to answer questions about any of those. The other 3 pages in your handout are just more information about the 988 program. I know I took up my 2 minutes. So I promised the majority floor leader to take me 2 minutes. I think that was 2 minutes. So with that, I'd stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I would remind you when we're talking, we don't use proper names. Representative Stiff.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Just for the bringer of the bill, I think we're all in favor of doing what we can to prevent suicide. I think all of us feel that way. I don't think there's anyone on the floor who feels different. We have it set up right now. It's funded for 3 years or through 2024. So the question is, why the trust fund funding mechanism for it? There are other social services we provide that don't have trust funds, and that's the piece of this that I just am of 2 minds about for the moment. So just want wanted to ask the sponsor, the bringer of the bill, to address that issue.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to speak to the previous speaker's comments just in a second, but I did want to let the body know, I may have misunderstood when the bill was read in, but I do believe it should be real clear that there were 3 no votes on this bill, and I was one of those no votes. And I will share with the body many of the reasons why today if I get the opportunity. But I did want to speak on the less interesting part is the funding. And I too find it curious about this trust fund. I want to remind the body that we have a responsibility to appropriate the funds of the state, and we continue to move these things off budget by creating these trust funds, and they become automatically funded. There may be very good reasons for automatically funding something, but we must remember our responsibility is to approve those funds on a regular basis, biannually actually. Once it's in a trust fund, we will not see that. And in committee, I brought an amendment which failed to remove that part. And I still think that that's an important thing for us to think about as a body, as to whether we want to continue to move things off the budget to where we cannot perform our responsibility as legislators and fund all of the state's functions through our approvals on a biannual basis. Thank you.
Representative Conrad.
Chairman Slagle, thank you. I stand before you, this body, the 67th legislature, and I understand I stand in between you and lunch, so please allow me just a few minutes. I believe each and every one of us in this body knows of someone who's been impacted or has committed suicide. That's an unfortunate commonality that we all share. I'll also share with you that I'm a member of the Uinta County Suicide Prevention Coalition. This issue is extremely important to me, to my community, and additionally the state. I'll also share with you that as the commander of the VFW, Post 7798, veterans are number 4, or we're ranked number 4th in the nation for suicides in this state. I think it's already been pointed out that unfortunately Wyoming ranks number one in suicides overall. The number with regards to veterans unfortunately is rising, almost up to number 2. I want to share with you a quick story. We think about the mining industry, specifically in Southwest Wyoming, how dangerous it is mining 1,500 feet under the ground and the amount of employees that we place under there. Give you some perspective about this dilemma of suicide. I want to share with you this. In the past 5 years, we've had more miners, 6 total, who have committed suicide versus 0 in industrial safety accidents or injuries. This is an epidemic that we need to get behind, all of us. I want to share with you that I do stand on and for this bill. It's incredibly important that suicide not only impacts that person, but their families, their communities, and their employers. Although we can debate the values of the money, but I encourage all of us to think about our Wyoming values. And again, I stand for and support of this incredibly important bill that I will also share with you that one time as a commander, I actually called the suicide prevention hotline to understand the flow chart and understand how the actual processes worked. I was fortunate to get a person from Brooklyn, New York. And I tried, after I convinced her I wasn't going to commit suicide, I just wanted to understand how the flow chart worked. The discouraging part to me until today, as we speak, is that a person from Brooklyn, New York doesn't understand what Wamsutter is, the Wind River Range, or more importantly, even where Mountain View, Wyoming is. This bill is incredibly important to me, our nation, and more importantly, our citizens of Wyoming. Thank you.
Senator Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, Representative Washit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Those of you who were here last year heard my comments with regards to this critically important issue as it applied to our first responders. And we did some good things last year to try and help our first responders in this respect. And I think this is a follow-up to that, and probably the most important piece of legislation that we'll consider this session might be before us at this moment. I do, however, have a question. A few years ago, we worked very hard to get our first Wyoming suicide prevention hotline. And prior to that, when a Wyoming citizen called for a hotline, they were routed to a suicide prevention hotline in some other state. And so when the caller said, well, I can't get to a therapist because I live in, small town Wyoming, there was no comprehension of the dynamics of Wyoming by the person on the other end. So we funded a call center. And then a couple months ago, I started hearing about Wyoming having a second call center. And that kind of took me by surprise. So my question to the bringer is, we went from having no Wyoming-based hotline to funding one, and now we have two. Why do we need two, and how much does it cost to have that second hotline in Wyoming? Thank you.
Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in my other job where I'm not legislating, I'm a pastor, and suicide is one of the most horrendous things that we deal with. As pastors, as citizens, as family members, it's the greatest moment of what if. What if we would have done this? What if we would have talked about that? And so I say all that so you hear my heart. My heart is that we address suicide in our state. I just sent out an email, though, that will talk about call lines and call centers. Is this the answer? Okay, it's in Casper. I'm not trying to be mean, but chances are they don't understand what's going on in Du Bois if you live in Casper. So I mean, it's a very, very complicated issue. The second thing is this the funding structure that we want to use? I believe that in our effort to try fix a problem, we may throw money at something that doesn't truly fix the problem. And so I think that we have a federal program that has been implemented that we are trying to take on as our own. And I think that we just really need to ask a very, very simple policy question. Is this our job? And is this the right avenue? And I can't answer either of those for you, but I think you need to think about those things. I have a heart for suicide prevention more than anyone, and I, for one, am a pastor that talks about suicide openly, because I believe that as representative we heard a while back, it was something we used to not talk about. We need to talk about it. It's very real. It's very much here, but I believe furthermore, we have a culture that's been created, a culture without hope, and we have hope, and that's more what we need to share is that aspect. So I really would just challenge you, are we wanting to put 40 some odd million dollars into a permanent fund to continue a federal program that is it truly going to fix it? There's been suicide hotlines forever. For as long as I've been alive, I remember as a kid being told about suicide hotlines. Was it someone I was going to talk to in the state of Wyoming? Maybe not. But the truth of the matter is there's still suicide, and we've had suicide hotlines. So I would just challenge, let's stretch our brain and figure out if there's something better out there, or if maybe this is the answer. And if it is this the best way to fund it? And just really start asking questions so we don't throw money at something that doesn't work and still have a problem. Thank you.
Representative Luck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Much of what I was about ready to say has been said. I'll just follow up on a few things. As no one in here is going to argue whether this is a very, very important issue, and everybody in this room has probably been affected by it. But as you've heard, there's many different perspectives on this in terms of where people land. Some people, government involvement, of course, is the obvious step. Others, no government involvement. You'll see the full spectrum and range of, hey, faith-based solutions may be the only answer. They're all opinions. Everyone in this room shares some subset or some grouping of those. So I just want to put that out there as an important thing to make sure there's grace with everybody as we go through, because this will be a tough argument. There's no question about that. Going back to kind of what was said, the very first thing we tend to do, we see a problem like this and we say, man, let's go throw money at it.
I think that's where we got to take, from a government perspective, sorry, wanted to be clear on that. We have a tendency to do that. It's not that it's necessarily a bad solution, but I think one of the things that can be very easy for us to do is fire and forget. Okay, we throw money at it, we put a big funding machine behind it, and we say, hey, we're good to go, we did our job. I think in this case, the fact that there is this wide range of beliefs that this is the right answer, many would say, again, government is not the solution in here. And it's not that the call center can't work with other organizations. I know Chairman made that part very clear. But I just want to make sure that we take more of a, maybe this is the engineer in me, but we take more of a hands-on approach to this rather than let's go put $46 million into funds to fund this. And let's take more of a hands-on approach and fund it more carefully. Take a different approach. That would be my recommendation. So I take more of a hands-on approach, might be the wrong perspective, but at least a perspective where we have to address it. We have to look and say, how effective is the solution we've put money on here? That's where I think we need to take a good hard look at the approach we take to move forward on this, to make sure that the oversight and the assessment, did we take the right approach? In some ways, and I don't mean to step across any lines, but in some ways, the truth is that call to a crisis center, it's not that it's not effective, but we must admit to some degree, it's a bit of an attack on a symptom, right? When it may not be moving back to the solution. I only throw that out from the perspective to make sure we think the problem through more broadly and keep our finger on the pulse of the effectiveness of what we do, because this is a very important issue. And like I said, I'm sure everyone's been affected by this. Thank you so much.
Representative Heiner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to speak this morning. I'm sure everyone here has heard a lot of comments from their constituents about suicide prevention. You've probably done some research, as I have. Since 2009 till today, our suicide rates have gone up by 1/3, so it's continuing to increase. Coincidentally, in the year 2012 and 2013, 2014, they dropped by 1/3. Now, why is that? I haven't been able to figure what the external factors were to have them drop for those 2 or 3 years. But since then, they've been on a steady incline again. And so we're at an all-time high right now. And in fact, this body has been talking about suicide prevention for a number of years. We started these call centers locally, within Wyoming, to try and curb this. But since we put that in place, suicides have increased another 8%. So have we landed on the solution? I don't think so. I think there's too many external factors to get our arms around right now. And it's my fear that we will fund this trust fund, we'll put money in a corpus, we'll pat ourselves on the back and go home to wherever our homes are and not deal with it again as it needs to be dealt with. It's my humble belief that we need to leave this appropriation in our annual budgets so that we deal with it on an annual basis. We're in charge of the money of the state. We appropriate that. We need to take that responsibility seriously and not turn it over to some managers that are not elected that are managing a trust. Now, is the suicide helpline being effective? I hope so, but the numbers don't show that yet. Let's let it play out for a few more years. Let's keep the suicide hotlines in place. Let's fund them in our budget, but let's look for other external sources of the problem and not fund a trust, make a corpus of $40 million and feel like it's gonna solve the problem, because I don't think it will. We need to get on top of this. And so I am so much in favor of suicide prevention. I've seen it, I've dealt with it, but 40 million corpus for a suicide hotline, I do not believe is going to be the answer. We need more than that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just share with the body that as the legislature and as the state as a whole has tried to establish the state's role in mental health and establishing a mental health policy, repeatedly we have come to the conclusion as one of the key components of mental health in our policy is to have suicide hotlines and suicide assistance. And so nobody is trying to suggest that a suicide hotline is the end-all solution for suicide, but it's a very key component, as has been recognized by our mental health professionals and in organizations around, to have in place. I think I would just share some information asked by the good chairman of the judiciary. We have 2 suicide hotlines now, one in the center part of the state in his town, and then one up in the Bighorn Basin. There's 2. It was really necessary to get 2 for staffing and then to cover the 24/7. For a while, we had 1, and it wasn't getting the 24/7, and so there'd be this time that it would still shift, like on weekends or at certain times of night, and go to an out-of-state hotline. And so then the Department of Health, when we adopted the current appropriations, which is using ARPA dollars to fund it, they funded 2 in-states to give us the full 24/7, 365 days of the year within the state. So that's that component. That funding was a $2.1 million fund or appropriation that covers the funding of these 2 suicide hotlines. Probably would end in sometime in 2020. Well, it would get us through 2025. So having the conversation on how we fund these forward is really important. I think as we've looked at some of these bills that talk about how the revenue off a corpus or a trust fund is then distributed, this one is pretty direct. It goes to the Department of Health. It's not left to a board or anybody else to decide how it's used. It just comes back to the Department of Health for issues regarding suicide. So I think as we have the conversation on how to fund this very important component of our mental health policy, which is suicide hotlines, look again at the structure, how it's set up, how we determine if putting that much money in it is the right way to go, or to put it into the standard budget. I think it's a fair argument and a fair discussion to have over the next couple of days as we do this. But the 988 thing is critically important and needs to come into place. One question that I would hope maybe the good chairman of Revenue could share with us is, in this bill, it talks about establishing the corpus, and then it talks about putting the 40 million in, but it doesn't set a ceiling on that. I just wondered if that was a conversation, or if I'm not reading that accurately. Is it 40 million is what we want to get to? Is there, and so if he could just expand on that a little bit. Thank you.
Representative Almond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good representatives, this is a day that I knew it was coming, but it's a day I've regretted for a while now. I have a little story to tell you. 2 years ago, well, first off, my niece lives with me. She comes home on weekends. 2 years ago at Christmas, she calls and says, "Uncle Bill, can I bring a friend home? It's a little girl, she's my best friend. We work together." And I said, "Of course you can, you know you can." But she used to leave her dog outside. Her little friend came and they had 2 weeks off for Christmas. And I got to know the little girl, got to love the little girl. Then 2 weeks later, when they were home, she called my niece and says, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it now. They were on the phone together. They were best friends. My niece spent a half hour trying to talk her out of it before it happened, on the phone to her very best friend. If your very best friend and your coworker can't talk you out of it, I don't know anybody who can. My niece knew her problems, knew what she was dealing with. I'm sorry, but it's very hard for me. But this bill, I could support it if it was $2 million and then $2 million next year and $2 million after that. But 46 million, I don't think I can do, because I don't think it's going to help. If we went ahead and give the $2 million, we'll get them through another year, and then we can say, hey, show us how this has helped. Show us what good you're doing. And then I'd say, yeah, you guys are doing good. Here's another 2 million. Or if it needs 3. And if you prove to me you can stop this or even put a big dent in it, I'll give you 100 million. But as of today, folks, I just don't see this happening. I don't see a big help here. And I really thank you for your time.
Representative Knapp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These bills are tough, these emotional ones, because we all have a story. We all know somebody, just as we heard. And when those things happen, we want to put money towards that to solve a problem. But the problem still exists. So how did this get paid before this program ever came about? Were there suicide hotlines before? Well, obviously, yes. Last year, there was $324 billion given by individuals to charity. And I just happened to pull up suicide prevention lines right now. There's 13 different lines. And they vary from veterans to trans to all different kinds of issues that people come up with today that they need help with. But this is an example of government trying to insert itself into hope, faith, family, community, religion. This is government trying to insert itself. And so we come up with these programs nationwide, when really sometimes it's a local issue for Wyoming, for our communities, for our churches. So here we have a program, and whether it's Medicaid, whether it's hotlines, they come from the government with a limited amount of funding to try to solve a problem that will continue to exist. So 2024 is the end date, and here we are picking up that program. But out of $324 billion in charitable giving, I guarantee there will be that next year, and the year after. So as government continues to try to solve problems, individuals and communities step up to solve those problems as well. And so applying $40 million to a trust may not be the solution. Maybe the solution for this body is to put more into mental health services, try to reach the core of issues versus the results. Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On and against the bill. I am a pastor. I've been 2 different times on the opposite side of a suicide call, and it's tough. I appreciate the things that you've just heard here. Also, as a pastor, one of the things that I've noticed is a lot of people see a problem and they decide, gee, I don't know what to do about it, so we'll just pay somebody to go do that. We'll bring on a new pastor to the organization. We'll call him the evangelist. Therefore, because I'm paying this evangelist, it's no longer my responsibility to go out and do what God has called me to do. Suicide prevention is the responsibility of every individual in this room, and we need to bone up. We need to understand what's happening. We need to pay attention to our friends and to our family and ask the questions that need to be asked at the right time. You can't convince me. I've looked at the thing that suicide hotlines are particularly effective. My daughter came to me once for advice, and she says, I don't like the way things are working out in my life. And I use the old analogy, well, if you're sick of eating corn, quit planting corn. We have this knee-jerk reaction that every time we hear about a problem, we will, as it's been stated, we'll throw money at it. And this is the first thing we do. I like the idea of keeping it there. It may indeed help somebody out. I do not like the idea of not revisiting this, of perpetuating spending money on something that I'm not necessarily convinced is effective. At the same time, I really heartfelt encourage you folks, understand suicide as much as you're able. Pay attention to your friends and families and be your own hotline. Thank you.
Representative Byron.
Thank you, Chairman. I come today as a first responder. I am 911. I have zero training in mental health intervention. I have thousands of training in thousands of hours of training in firefighting, in wildland firefighting, in stop bleed, in CPR. I can't share some of the stories because this house can't hear them when I pull up in that district up north at the top of a river shed. And the public doesn't need to hear those. What is one life worth? 2021, state of Wyoming, what is 161 lives worth?
Speaker Summers? Okay. Any other discussion? Go ahead, Chairman Harshman. Go ahead, Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to answer a couple questions. I think as far as the first question was from representative from Campbell County, moving it off budget, and that is not the case. And I think with good representative from Fremont County, this is not an inviolate trust fund. If you look at all those groups of trust funds I sent you, there's only one of those that has its own kind of separate board, and that's the Wildlife Natural Resource Trust. But even appropriations looks at those projects. And so this would go through the appropriations process every year. I think the good representative up the road in Wheatland, Pastor, talked about faith-based. And certainly, if you read the bill through there, the community connections, if a caller says, I want to talk to my minister, they're going to get you with faith-based. And most of the local ministers are giving people their numbers. Here's my cell number. If somebody from Wheatland calls, hook me up. So that's a part of this. It's whatever that person. Then I think, I heard a lot. I appreciate the stuff, the whole government part. I appreciate it. I'll just tell you, I was in a little car crash for Christmas. I dialed 911. They were all there in about 4 minutes. 988 is here to stay. And we have had suicide prevention. That was mentioned. We've had, somebody said, I think from Campbell County, 13 lines. And that's part of the problem. And that's going to go away. And so we've had over 9,000 calls, 2,700 of those are veterans. Question from a good representative near the watershed where it said, how much is one life worth? Well, the CDC and the Wyoming Department of Health says each suicide costs our economy about $1.3 million. That's about 36 suicides to fully fund this trust. There are 189. Last year in 21, the last year for data, 180 in 2020. COVID thing You know, we don't have the data yet for 22, but that'll be coming out shortly. I think, question from representative from Lander, is the idea to keep growing this corpus, or like, are we going to come back next year and want 40 more million? I think that's what he was asking. The answer is no. The idea, though, with the reserve account, it's like all our corpuses should try to keep up with inflation. It'll tip and grow, hopefully a little bit, so it can continue to fund this. And then, yeah, I don't think there's any one answer. I don't think anybody said this is a solution and we can all walk away. There's a lot of pieces to this, and each one of these tragedies is different. And we've all been touched by it, and so I'm not going to share any more of my stories, but it's just one little piece of this thing. So our committee voted it out of committee as a great way to save some of our $2.5 billion surplus. And if 4 years from now we decide, hey, the 988 thing is not working, or we have a benefactor who's going to pay for it, or something else, you can dissolve this trust. Or if 50 years from now, you know, whatever that'd be, the 90-something legislature decides we don't need that anymore. There's no such thing as telephones anymore. Who knows? They can dissolve this. So it's not like the Permanent Mineral Trust Fund or the Common School Account or the Hathaway. I think I answered most of those questions. And a question about 2 call centers. We did have 1 call center. It wasn't 24/7. I think that was kind of said. Department of Health realized now with these 2, they can go 12 hours and 12 hours and give 365 24/7. So that's the answer to that. Both of them are in the 988 system. I've tried to write down every question. Anyway, so regardless of your funding thoughts on the bill, there's not an amendment right now to change that. If you have ideas you want to do differently, I'd encourage that on second reading. It's important for this bill to pass if you want to have the 988 system move forward, where we have a Wyoming, because this is enabling legislation for the 988 system. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I think we're ready to vote on this thing. I guess we got one. Thank you.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was able, had a couple of questions asked. I think I'm able to help you understand just the impact that the 988 system has had since it's been implemented after May of this year, 2022. Prior to that, with 1 call center in the state and the other services being from out of state, we averaged about 220 calls per month coming to those centers. The average wait time was around 60 seconds before they come, with the challenge that those out-of-state people didn't know local resources to direct them to, whether it be an ecclesiastical leader or a professional service. Since the implementation of the second call center in May, those numbers, calls per month, have gone up to 654 in December. 564, a little dyslexic today, 564 in December, with the average wait time of about 8 seconds. So as people who are in crisis reach out, time is of the essence, and knowing where the resources are locally is critically important. And I think that sometimes with the best of intentions, we say we should be just handling that through our local ecclesiastical group, or send them down to grandma's house, or do whatever that may be, that we should handle it internally. And I think we found over time that it needs to be broader than that. When we try to handle things internally, even our own mental health issues, sometimes that just doesn't play out real well. And so trying to spread this out, and I believe as we define what the role, right, it's what we're doing now, define what the role of state government is in delivering mental health services to the state of Wyoming, that this 988 system is probably a good component to help facilitate that policy.
Representative Bear.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The good chairman of Revenue mentioned that this 988 is not going away, and that, I believe, is actually very true. Last year, the federal government funded the 988 program with $24 million. This year, $432 million. So 18-fold, they've increased the funding. We don't know yet what that's going to be used for. We don't know what Wyoming's portion of that is going to be. But let's be clear, an aye vote today does not mean that you're instituting a new 988 program. And a no vote does not mean that 988 is not going to be funded in the state of Wyoming. As the good Speaker Pro Tem mentioned, this is already funded from your predecessors through 2024. So we're funded. The question here today is whether we're going to fund it in a different way. But I do want to clear up one thing. I did a little research on how these phones work. When you call 988, the phone call goes to that federal system that's funded with the $432 million. They look at your area code and dispatch the phone call to our area code or our centers here in Wyoming if you have a 307 area code. I do know lots more of our people are having not a 307 area code, so their calls will not be answered by somebody in Wyoming. It'll depend on what their area code is. Now, that $432 million that the feds are putting into the system, it may change that to where it's more like 911, where they can locate you. That'd be great. But we just don't know. So I urge a no vote until we find out what this $432 million that the feds are spending on this program is going to do. And your no vote does not mean that you're taking away 988 in the state of Wyoming. Thank you.
Chairman Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, we did get some more information on the new federal appropriation. I'm glad that representative from Campbell County, and that thing is broken up. There's certain slivers for veterans, for Hispanic Americans, for all kinds of different subgroups. And what I'm told from our department, we're going to get at max, maybe a couple 100,000, 250,000 to fund this. So that's the newest information we got on that. I will say this, if you don't like the funding, bring an amendment tomorrow. And we can, but if you want to have this lifeline, this is all new statute that sets up the program. Right now, we're operating off these emergency rules of COVID and a health emergency. That's all going to come to an end. So I really appreciate the debate, and and we all know this. I mean, we're going to do our best to try to move Wyoming out of first place in this horrible statistic. This isn't the cure-all, certainly, but I don't think any of us know what the cure-all is, or we'd do it, right? But it's probably part of it, and we'll just keep moving forward. So thank you for the good debate, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and with that, I'd call for the question. I guess we have another member ready to speak. My apologies.
Representative Trujillo.
Sorry, I just had to chime in here at the end after listening to everybody. And suicide awareness is a big thing, and the 988 is a good program. I've known 17 people in my lifetime, 2 family members that have committed suicide, and we were never able to help any of them. So I'm hoping this line helps. However, we need to be fiscally responsible and look at the money that we're putting into this trust and the usage and where we are with it. So I just ask that you guys look at the numbers, but sufficiently fund this at the same time. Thank you.
Question being called. All in favor of Representative Harshman's motion that when the committee of the whole rise to report, it do so with the recommendation that the bill do pass? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. Division being called. All in favor, please stand. All opposed, please stand. House Bill 65 has passed the Committee of the Whole, 34-23. Majority Floor Reader.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Committee of the Whole begs leave to rise and sit again until 2:15.
You've all heard the motion. All in favor, say aye. Committee reports. Committee announcements. Okay. Chairman Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 8, Transportation, Highways, Military Affairs, will meet immediately. So please go grab your food and come to the room immediately so we can get through these bills. We'll be down in E003 to hear House Bill 57, Armed Forces Amendments, House Bill 38, Wyoming National Guard member referral, House Bill 59, Wyoming National Guard tuition benefits, and House Bill 56, Purple Star Schools, if time permits. Again, we will be meeting immediately upon recess.
Okay, Chairman Yin, and one announcing body, you need to be back at 2:15 because we have one of our senators that's going to be here to speak to us. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I just wanted to announce to everyone, again, CSG West is here to talk about WLA, but they also have sandwiches for those that need to get to their committees. Please stop down there. It's on the first floor, not in the extension, on the first floor, west side. Thank you.
Chairman Western.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 6, Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources, will meet immediately after this announcement to discuss House Bill 76, Licensing Board Amendments, and House Bill 104, Hunting of Predatory Animals Amendments.
Chairman Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 1 will meet Friday morning, January 20th at 7:30 to hear 3 bills, House Bill 78, House Bill 90, and House Bill 112.
Chairman Nichols.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your House Appropriations will meet in 10 minutes after a little lunch. We will hear House Bill 25, House Bill 53, House Bill 125, House Bill 97, re-referrals 181 and 182.
Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Your committee number 9 will meet Friday morning starting at 8:30 with a brief presentation on the state of Wyoming's mining industry, and then immediately take up House Bill 136, House Bill 153, and House Bill 159.
The House is adjourned until 2:15.